Hey guys, my name is Iasmina and welcome back to my channel. Today I was feeling in a bit of a very cozy mood, and so I decided to film the Finally Fall book tag. I will leave the original creator of this tag down in the description, so make sure to check them out. Fall is definitely my favorite time of the year. It's my favorite season. I just love the coziness of it. I love the leaves that change, and I like the rainy days when you sit inside and just read a book, light a candle, read a book, and it's just so lovely. And so I felt like this tag was very fitting for me. Without further ado, let's get straight into the questions. I'm gonna try to answer the questions with books that I haven't featured on my channel mostly. So books that I haven't talked about before, just because I obviously read a lot more books than I talk about, simply because I haven't found the opportunity to talk about. The first question is, in fall, the air is crisp and clear. Name a book with a vivid setting. Okay, so that has to go to The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Oh, this book. This is definitely one of my favorite books, one of my favorite fantasy novels. I didn't include it in my top 10 fantasy books of all time, simply because I guess for that list I was mostly thinking of sort of epic fantasy, whereas this is more sort of historical fiction with magic wrapped up in there somehow. It's definitely fantasy and it's definitely incredibly magical. It is simply beautiful, and the setting in it is so definitely vivid and incredible, and honestly, this is my personal aesthetic, sort of black, white, and red. This whole aesthetic of the Night Circus itself just speaks to me on a personal level. I won't lie, I would love to visit the circus if it was real. The writing is beautiful. It's the kind of writing that is so enchanting. Like, every word is right where it's supposed to be, and it's the same sort of beautiful fantasy writing that, for example, in my opinion, Rothfuss does in his Kingkiller Chronicles. It's beautiful, it's magical, I love it. Read The Night Circus if you have not already. The second question is, nature is beautiful, but also dying. Name a book that is beautifully written, but also deals with a heavy topic like loss or grief. So for this question, I'm actually gonna talk about two books that immediately sprang to my mind when thinking about this, and also books that I haven't really featured heavily on my channel. I've talked about one of them before. The first one is a contemporary novel, and that is I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. If you haven't seen my top 10 YA contemporary books, please go and watch that video, because, spoilers, this is my favorite YA contemporary book of all time. It is one of my favorite just books in general of all time. It is beautifully written, but it does also deal with kind of a heavy topic, and definitely grief and loss. The characters in this, I felt for them so much in ways where, when you read about romance in books and you're kind of rooting for the characters to be together, but you're not really that invested. Personally, I don't get super invested in romance arcs in books, but this one, I was there every second of it, and I just enjoyed it so much. I'm not gonna go into a whole lot about this book, but if you haven't read it yet, regardless of whether you read contemporary or not, I think this is just an amazing book. Regardless of genre, read it. And then the second book that I think is beautifully written and also talks about grief and loss is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. So I don't think I've ever talked about this book on my channel. I might have shown it in my bookshelf scavenger hunt video, I think, but otherwise, yeah, I don't think I've ever mentioned it before. But yeah, this is one of my favorite books of all time. I say that about a lot of books because I read a lot of books and I have a lot of favorite books. This is super popular. The movie of it came out. I have not actually seen the movie, and I plan on doing that sometime soon. There's a beautiful written story from the perspective of death, and it's about this little girl called Liesel during the Second World War, and we follow her as she discovers her love of books and how she deals with everything when the worst happens. Obviously, this is a Second World War story. It actually takes place in Berlin. It's a sad story, don't get me wrong. It's a very sad story, but it's beautiful. Quick side note, I'm actually going to Berlin tomorrow, and I'm going to visit the place where one of the events in this book takes place. The third question is, fall is back to school season. Share a non-fiction book that taught you something new. Ooh, okay, that's quite a lot of them. I'm going to talk about a book that I read as part of research for a series that I'm writing. So I'm currently working on, amongst many different writing projects, one of them is a YA fantasy series. And this series is heavily inspired by Japanese history, like the Japanese Edo period and Japanese mythology, and so I'm trying to do a lot of research for it. One of my absolute favorite parts of actually writing is the opportunity to learn something new. For every book that I've written so far, or that I've started planning, I had to research a specific topic, whether it was the history of Vienna or music, or in this case, Japanese history and mythology. A part of that research was this book. This is called Everyday Life in Traditional Japan by Charles J. Dunn. And it's just a sort of like a random book I found while trying to find books about traditional Japan or Edo period Japan. And yeah, this is it. I mean, it talks about how life was like during that time with a lot of illustrations. It talks about samurai culture and geishas, so calligraphy and all the different art forms that were born during that time. And yeah, just so many cool things. But I learned so much from this. Like, this covers everything. It obviously covers it in sort of a more general term. It doesn't go super in detail on everything, but it includes everything that I really wanted to research. It's not one of these books that I could really recommend to you because it's about a very specific topic that I was personally interested in, and you know, if you're interested in traditional Japan, Edo period Japan, then sure, pick it up. Question number 4 is, in order to keep warm, it's good to spend some time with the people we love. Name a fictional family, household, or friend group that you'd like to be a part of. Okay, well, I think the obvious answer here for any Potterhead is the Weasleys. That family just seems so warm and welcoming, and as an only child, you know, I find the idea of having a big family, a lot of siblings, kind of fun and fascinating. It probably isn't that much fun if you're actually part of it. I actually do really enjoy the family aspect in the Lara Jean trilogy. It's a YA contemporary trilogy. I'll put pictures up here. I've read the first one on my Kindle, and the first one is called To All the Boys I've Loved Before. So it's about this girl called Lara Jean who writes these love letters to all of her most intense crushes. She never intends to send them out. She just writes these letters to kind of maybe have closure on these crushes and to sort of finish with them and pour her heart out into these letters and then never think about it again. But then one day she finds that her letters have gone missing, and the boys who she has written to come up to her and show her that they received these letters that were never meant to be sent out. And as you can imagine, chaos. It's a really heartwarming series, and I would really recommend it as a YA contemporary. The movie of it just came out on Netflix, and I did see it, and it was awesome. It was just as it should have been. Lovely movie and lovely series, so I would definitely recommend that. But I do really like Lara Jean's family, like her dad and her sisters. Question number 5 is, the colorful leaves are piling up on the ground. Show us a pile of fall-colored spines. Here is something I put together just from randomly looking at my bookshelf. So you can kind of see a theme here. I'm going for sort of browns and oranges and a bit of sort of blood reds. I don't know if that's the thing, but so we've got Eon by Alison Goodman, we've got The Magician King by Lev Grossman, we've got Demon Road by Derek Landy, we've got The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, and we've got Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. So I feel like this, at least to me in my head, this represents a good pile of fall-colored themed spines. I have not read Demon Road. Everything else I have, and this one I have mixed feelings about, The Blade Itself, but everything else that I've read, so these 3 I would highly recommend. I have not spoken about Eon and the Eon duology before, but awesome duology, young adult fantasy duology. I would highly recommend it, and everything else I've talked about before. So yeah. Question number 6 is, fall is the perfect time for some storytelling by the fireside. Share a book wherein somebody is telling a story. Okay, so the obvious answer is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, but I have talked about that endlessly on my channel. I will continue to talk about it because it is my favorite book of all time, but I will try to find a different answer for this. Okay, so I'm gonna mention 2 books here. One of them I'm not 100% sure if someone is telling the story. I'll mention what it is in a second, but this one I'm sure. It's just that I've already talked about this a bit on my channel, but this is Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan, and I've recently read this, and this has definitely become one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. And in this one, the main character, similarly to The Name of the Wind, is telling his own story. So we follow him in the present where he's telling his story, and then we follow the actual story, so him in the past. But one I haven't mentioned before, but I'm not 100% sure if the character is telling his story, because I read this on Audible, and it is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. And it's a fantasy novel, and I remember it's told in the same way as Bloodsong and The Name of the Wind, and sort of the past and the present. But I can't remember if the character in the present is telling his story from the past. In my head right now, that rings true, but I could be wrong because I read this a while ago and I don't entirely remember. So correct me if I'm wrong, but Lies of Locke Lamora. Question number 7 is, the nights are getting darker. Share a dark, creepy read. Now, actually my last video was all about this question, so I shared 10 spooky reads, so I'll link that video up in the card symbol and down in the description, so make sure to check that out if you haven't already. I have recommendations for spooky reads. But just quickly here, I'll just mention And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, which I've recently read and loved, but go and watch that video for more spooky reads. Question number 8 is, the days are getting colder. Name a short, heartwarming read that could warm up somebody's cold and rainy day. I'm gonna say The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. So it's quite a short read. It's, I think, 300 pages, but it reads super quickly. So you can definitely read this in an afternoon or an evening. If you don't know what it is, this follows Bilbo Baggins as he goes on an adventure and wherein he finds the ring from the Lord of the Rings. So this is kind of a prequel to the Lord of the Rings, but it was written a long time in advance of Lord of the Rings. Question number 9 is, fall returns every year. Name an old favorite that you'd like to return to soon. I'm also going to talk about 2 books for this question. The first one is an old favorite of mine, and that is Looking for Alaska by the wonderful John Green. So this was my first John Green book that I read, and it's actually his debut novel, so that is fitting. If you don't know, John Green is probably my favorite contemporary author and also one of my biggest inspirations for YouTube. I mean, if you don't know, I've been doing YouTube for now 10 years. I actually had my 10-year anniversary late September, but that was actually just for this channel because I've had other channels before that. But anyway, John Green is a huge inspiration for me in many different areas. I actually have a video from long ago where I go and pick up this book. When I was living in Romania, it was actually pretty difficult to buy things online. I didn't have a credit card, so the only way I found to buy English books was through this online store, but where it sent the book to your post office, and then you went to the post office and paid cash at the post office for the order. It was a strange system, but I actually I'll put the video up in the card symbol if you're curious. This was when I was 16 or 17, if you want to see cringy 17-year-old me. I'll put that video up, but that's when I picked this book up, and I obviously read it straight away, and I loved it, and it was my introduction to John Green, and I've read all of his books since. I've reread most of them, but I have not reread Looking for Alaska, and so I'm very curious to see what I think of it now. So I'll definitely try and get to this again soonish. And then the other book I would like to revisit, I actually talk about in next week's video. I film like in batches, so I film quite a few videos at once. So that's why I talk about a video that I'm going to put up next week for you guys. But it will be a book haul, and in it I talk about The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. This is a book I read in Romanian when I was about 12 years old, so probably a little young to read this book, but I remember I really, really loved it. And I know it's one of these books that you either love or hate, and so I'm very curious to reread it and see if my opinion changes, if I feel differently about it now. Next question is, fall is the perfect time for cozy reading nights. Indeed. Share your favorite cozy reading accessories. Okay, so obvious answer, something I have right here, is a candle. I do love burning candles, and I have quite a few of them all around my house, and this is actually one of my favorite ones, and it's quite hot. It's called Ebony and Oak by Yankee. Obviously a nice mug of coffee or tea or hot chocolate or whatever your hot beverage of choice is. And then I always like to put on like now I have on a cardigan, but like a sweater or a hoodie or something comfortable. I also have this throw blanket that I definitely use whenever I sit on the couch or on the chair, and I just use to wrap myself up with. Again, not something necessarily just for fall and winter. I pretty much do that all the time because I'm one of these people who's always cold. And then speaking of always cold, I have the best thing that's ever been invented. I have an electric blanket, but it's not one of these blankets that you wrap yourself with. It's meant to go underneath your sheet, and it's the best feeling to go and have a shower or do whatever in the cold apartment and then go in bed, and it's a warm bed. It is the best feeling in the world. And it also helps because then you don't have to use your heating, so it saves up on the heating bill. Obviously you use electricity for it, but I guess depending on where you live, electricity is usually cheaper than heating. I definitely use that a lot. If you're curious, I got it at Jysk, which is a Danish furniture store, but you can find it in other countries as well. Okay, and the final question is to spread the autumn appreciation and tag some people, but I don't like tagging specific people. Just if you want to do this tag, please do, and tell me about it, and so I can watch it. But yeah, anyone is welcome to do this tag. I was not tagged by anyone to do it. I just thought it would be fun, so I did it. So yeah, this was my finally fall book tag answers. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed making it. I love talking about fall and cozy things. I just realized you could probably see this pile of books that I've been hoarding of all the books that I talked about in this video. It was just a little bit in shot, but there you go. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I hope you have a nice cozy evening, maybe reading a really good book and having a nice cup of tea or something, and I will see you next week with a new video.